Godzilla is back. Things were quiet there for about a decade, but Legendary rebooted the Western arm of the franchise in 2014, and Toho followed suit with Shin Godzilla. Today, Legendary's MonsterVerse is going strong, with the Monarch series and another Kong crossover in the works. Plus, Toho has another reboot out, Godzilla Minus One, and it's awesome. So I figured now's a good time for another crossover. It's time for Godzilla to face the ranking algorithm. My mission with this channel is simple: rank every movie ever created one at a time. I do this using a scientific approach. Every episode, I explain a movie. As I go, the ranking algorithm will react, gaining or losing points when the movie does something good or bad. At the end of the episode, we get a precise score, so the movie can be force ranked against every other movie ever made. Today, we're ranking Godzilla. No, not that movie. I want to do a good movie this week. Well, not that good. That's a seminal classic. I was thinking more modern. That's the one. Gareth Edwards' Godzilla from 2014, the one that kicked off the current franchise in the US. In the Philippines, 1999, Monarch scientists Ishiro Shirazawa and Vivian Graham are summoned to investigate an excavation site. Miners were sent there after a radiation pocket was discovered, thinking they'd find uranium. But as soon as they set up the heavy machinery, the ground collapsed into a giant cavern. Inside it, the scientists find the bones of some ancient colossal thing, and two giant spores, one dormant, the other already hatched, and whatever it birthed left a trail out of the cavern into the sea. In Japan, nuclear power plant supervisor Joe Brody doesn't know it, but he's been tracking its movements, because he's detected strange tremors which began in the Philippines and are now in their own backyard. He warns they might have to shut the reactor down, but no one wants to hear it. So he sends Sandra to lead a team of technicians into the reactor to investigate. That's Sandra Brody, his wife. And while she's down there, the tremors are no longer closing in. They're here. Joe orders a reactor shutdown, and he tells his wife to get out of there. He stands at the end of the tunnel waiting for her to come back, but there's been a reactor breach, and if they don't seal the doors, the whole city will be exposed. He begs Sandra to run as fast as she can, but they both know the truth. There isn't enough time. He seals the corridor, and through a tiny window in the door, she begs him to be a good father, take care of their son Ford. Joe promises that he will, and across town, Ford watches the plant collapse. Wow, you don't expect a movie about a giant lizard to start on such an emotional note. But going back to the opening scene, it's a tease of what's to come. First, you briefly watch America's nuclear weapons testing in 1954, but you see, those weren't just tests. They were apparently bombing Godzilla. Then we meet the Monarch scientists at that big cavern. Scientists discovering something strange, which previews the danger ahead, is a bit of a trope. But they do a good job of sticking to character point of view to give you a true sense of scale. We don't get a lot of random shots from high up or impossible angles just because it'd give a better view of the skeleton. Instead, we're mostly stuck watching from the same POV as the characters, which helps the movie feel more literally grounded. Then Joe Brody, the heroic scientist who knows something is wrong but nobody will listen. This is also a trope, but it's elevated by Bryan Cranston's phenomenal acting. The same is true of the scene where his wife can't make it out on time. You've got to shut the door, but they're still in there. We've also seen this before, but again, Cranston and Binoche give great performances, so you really feel it. And the long, empty hallway in front of him makes the tension so palpable because you can feel how far away she is. You can see how much of a long shot it'll be. It's a great start. You worry a movie like this will be all spectacle with no human drama, and as a result, no stakes. But this scene casts those worries aside. So, where are we at? Very solid start. 15 years later, Joe's son Ford has grown into a U.S. Navy officer focused on explosive ordnance disposal, or stopping bombs. After 14 months away, he finally returns home to his wife and son in San Francisco, Elle and Sam. But it's a short-lived reunion. Ford gets a call from Japan to find out his crazy dad is at it again. Joe's been arrested for trespassing in the quarantine zone around the collapsed plant. Ford bails him out and at Joe's home finds out just how deep his obsession goes. Joe sent Sandra to her death, and to this day has no idea what killed her. They say natural disaster, but he knows they're hiding something, and whatever it is that they're hiding, a few days ago, it started talking again. The same tremors he observed 15 years ago, and Joe can prove it if he can sneak back into the quarantine zone and retrieve his old data from their old home. This time, Ford comes with him. This movie's had a lot of cliches so far, but it's overcome them with sheer talent, both in front of and behind the camera. But Cranston's character at this point devolves into stereotypical crackpot, complete with a crazy wall, and this is 6 years after Pepe Sylvia. It also feels odd how quickly Ford is willing to leave his family for Japan right after their reunion, and how quickly he decides to break into the quarantine zone with his dad, where he's risking radiation exposure at worst and prison time at best. And on the subject of irresponsible fathers, you'd also expect Joe to have some reluctance about putting Ford in harm's way. He already lost a wife at that plant. Does he want to risk losing a son too? And does he want to rob Ford's family of a father? None of these things are entirely implausible, but they just feel like decisions too big to get glossed over. In doing so, undercuts character development a bit. They get to the old house, where Joe finds the data and a picture of his wife. But they're quickly captured and taken into custody at the plant, where a giant spore is being held and showing signs of life. It glows red, producing more of those signals Joe's been tracking, and when they reach a fever pitch, it hatches. A colossal, bug-like creature springs out of it and escapes, leaving much collateral damage in its wake, including Joe, who just barely survives after a brutal fall. You come to a movie like this hoping for spectacle. This is our first true taste of it, and it doesn't disappoint. Just like that early scene of the skeleton hinted, Gareth Edwards does a great job sticking with characters' point of view, looking up at the towering monster or seeing it from a distance. Spielberg famously took the same approach in War of the Worlds, and it's just as effective here. Similarly, moments that could be over-dramatized and made more cinematic instead happen in a frank, offhand manner. Cranston's character falls off a bridge, in the distance from Ford's point of view. Like a found footage movie, these choices make the proceedings feel grounded, which makes the danger feel real. With a dangerous monster on the loose, the U.S. Navy takes over the operation, but keeps Ichiro and Vivian for their expertise. And after listening to Joe's rantings, realizing he's onto something, Ichiro takes him and Ford along too. On the helicopter, Joe struggles to get out a few words that'll likely be his last. "Go home to your family," he tells his son. "You keep them safe, okay? Whatever it takes." Meanwhile, the Navy prepares their operation, tracking the Muto, or massive unidentified terrestrial organism, which has wreaked havoc on their systems through its EMP ability. After watching his father zipped up in a body bag, Ford is summoned for a meeting with Ichiro and Vivian. And just like that, the guy you might have thought was the main character is gone. That might gain the movie some points because it's unexpected and raises the stakes with a word of caution. No one is safe. At the same time, it leaves a void because with Cranston gone, you realize none of these characters are all that interesting. Ford himself is a blank slate, as is his wife Elle, and that's a problem because it seems Ford trying to get home to his family will be the emotional crux of the movie, and with such nothing characters, it's hard to get invested. Now, Just like Cranston's Joe character, the others also have great talent behind them. Ford and Elle are played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen. The pair of scientists are played by Ken Watanabe and Sally Hawkins. But so far, none have had to show the same emotional range as Cranston, and they all come off as pretty one-note. So no one is safe, but we don't care about anyone. The scientists brief Ford. In 1954, the first time a nuclear submarine ever reached the lower depths, it awakened something. All those nuclear bomb tests in the 50s were our attempts to kill that something millions of years older than mankind, from an age when the Earth was 10 times more radioactive than today. This animal, and others like it, consumed this radiation as a food source. But as the levels on the surface subsided, they adapted to live deeper in the ocean and absorb radiation from the planet's core. The organization they worked for, Monarch, was established to monitor and research these creatures, especially him, the one at the top of the primordial ecosystem, for all intents and purposes, a god, or as they call him, Godzilla. They found the bones of another just like him, killed by creatures like the one that's now on the loose, parasitic spores. The one that hatched in 1999 burrowed straight to the nearest radiation source, Joe's power plant. It cocooned there, absorbing radiation for 15 years before hatching into the creature they met today. While in custody, Joe had warned that the creature could knock out their power, and he was right. It used the radiation it absorbed to release an EMP. The scientist asked Ford if he can recall any other insights from his father, and he does. Joe described the seismic anomalies as talking, so they realize something is probably talking back. In any case, they better find the Muto soon, but if they don't, Ichiro offers, nature has an order, a power to restore balance. I believe he is that power. And he points at an image of Godzilla. And so the stage is set. If we can't stop the Mutos, Godzilla will. But that was quite the exposition dump, and it gives the movie a disjointed feeling. We've been following Joe trying to solve a mystery. What are they hiding? This scene is the payoff where they explain everything, and it begs the question, did we need all the Joe stuff to get here? The connective tissue seems to be twofold. Thanks to Joe, Ford is now in the middle of this disaster, and there's this insight about the Muto talking. But otherwise, it feels like two separate movies, where one ended and now there's just some minor carryover into the second one. This could work if Joe's death adds emotional stakes, driving Ford to carry on his obsession and bring closure to his father's work. But for now, it feels like we could have just been following Ichiro from within Monarch from the start, rather than trying to do a mystery thriller first before turning into a disaster movie. The team heads to Hawaii, where Ford boards a train to the airport so he can go back home. But plans change when the Muto arrives with a captured Russian submarine filled with delicious nuclear material, and the monster doesn't go unnoticed by nature. Godzilla rises off the coast of Honolulu and fights off the creature before returning underwater. This is our first real look at Godzilla, and the effects don't disappoint. And it's not just about great CGI. Gareth Edwards continues finding creative ways of revealing these creatures from a human point of view. One of the most memorable moments is when they fire some flares, and you follow them to slowly unveil more and more of the giant lizard. He also enhances the POV by highlighting all the collateral damage effortlessly unleashed by these monsters, which as a person running for your life would be the immediate concern, not sitting back and watching the brawl unfold. So although we've seen giant monsters so many times before, by making the events feel grounded, this movie manages to once again make these monsters awe-inspiring. On the other hand, the movie continues to feel oddly disjointed. It stops in the middle of the action and cuts to San Francisco, where you catch a few glimpses of Godzilla's brawl on TV. And then it's suddenly morning in Honolulu, and it's the aftermath of the battle. We're only halfway through, so you don't want to show too much of the battle and undercut the grand finale, but the way they chose to avoid it feels artificial rather than motivated by character and story. In fact, Ford's life was in peril before they cut. A kid got separated from his parents, so Ford decided to watch over him and make sure he gets back to them. Then their train gets broken in half and derailed, so they end up dangling for their lives. How do they get out of this situation? It's left to your imagination, because that's when the movie cuts. It feels like they were setting up some human drama. The kid gets left behind, Ford has to take care of him. Then the filmmakers realized, wait a minute, nobody cares about this. Everyone's watching this movie for the monsters, not Ford. But we can't show too much of the monsters yet. You know what? Just cut. Just cut and go to the next scene. In the aftermath of the battle, Akio finds his parents, and Ford finds out the Muto is heading towards San Francisco, and Godzilla is following. Hunting, Ishiro clarifies. But there's still the question of who the Muto was talking to. And they realize the answer. It's the other spore, the one in the cavern that hadn't hatched yet. It's currently sitting at a nuclear waste repository in Nevada, and if it's been responding to the Muto's calls, it must have hatched. And sure enough, they find a giant hole in the mountain where it was kept. The second Muto is much like the first, but far bigger and wingless. It tramples its way through Vegas, while Ishiro and Vivian can only watch. They deduce it must be a different sex, a female, and the signals from the male Muto were a mating call. She's been waiting in her spore for the male to reach maturity, and now they're hoping to reproduce. The Navy's tracking models place all three creatures on a trajectory for San Francisco Bay, and they devise a plan. Strap a nuclear warhead to a boat, lure the creatures to its radioactivity, then blow them up. Vivian is skeptical. After all, they feed on radioactivity, but the Navy hopes the sheer blast of it will kill them. Ishiro thinks their best bet is Godzilla. Let him fight this battle on humanity's behalf. But the Admiral can't leave this to chance. They prepare the warheads and load them on a train for San Francisco. Ford convinces them to let him join so he can get home to his family, and his bomb expertise will come in handy, especially with these bombs. Because of the Muto's EMP ability, they can't rely on remote detonation, so instead they have to use analog timers. En route, they're intercepted by the female Muto, who already carries some offspring, preparing to hatch. She destroys the train and eats most of the warheads, leaving only one behind. The spectacle of this movie continues to satisfy. When the Muto approaches and Ford has to hold still to avoid confrontation, it harkens back to movies like Jurassic Park that perfected the formula. And the camera work continues to excel, like this shot looking up at the Muto from the water. At the same time, the human characters continue to disappoint. Ford really feels like a vestige from another movie, desperately trying to find a place in this one. He has no personality and feels unimportant to the broader story, which he has to pry his way into, and it feels like sheer dumb luck rather than ingenuity or skill when the next morning he seems to be the sole survivor of the Muto's attack. Ishiro and Vivian are also paper thin and one note, only there to provide exposition about the monsters, look concerned, and repeatedly caution the Admiral to take a different course. At sunrise, the Navy rescues Ford and the surviving warhead, then it continues on with their plan. They evacuate areas on the coast. Elle puts her and Ford's son Sam on a bus, while she waits behind, hoping her husband will show. And soon, that bus ends up on a bridge, directly in Godzilla's path. He stands next to the bridge, and seemingly hurt, or at least irritated by a barrage of missiles and bullets, he careens through the bridge, just as Sam's bus and several others speed ahead to avoid the carnage. It's moments like this where the movie shines. Despite underdeveloped characters, if things feel grounded and you put children in harm's way, there'll be some tension. And this is one of our best looks at Godzilla in action so far, filtered through this movie's POV-oriented camera work It looks great. It's also interesting to see Godzilla's behavior. He almost seems like he's going out of his way to not hurt or maybe even to protect civilians. It feels like he stands just in time to block some missiles and avoids destroying the bridge as long as he can, only plowing through after taking a lot of hits. They get the bomb off the coast and arm it with 90 minutes until detonation. Then the Muto sets off another EMP. Ships stop. Jets crash from the sky, and the male Muto arrives to snatch that nuclear warhead. He meets his female mate in the middle of the city and hands it off to her, creating a whole new problem for them to deal with. If that bomb goes off now, it'll take about 100,000 civilians with it, and they can't stop it remotely because it's analog. So they're going to have to parachute into the Muto's nest, where their offspring could very possibly be waiting for them. Sounds like a job for our resident bomb expert, Ford Brody. Maybe Brody just represents a broader issue with this. You have to find a way to shoehorn humans into a plot they have no business in. This is a fight between Godzilla and the Mutos. You need people there for a human element. The problem is when it becomes so transparent how you're manipulating events to get there. And this plan goes so wrong so quickly that it's almost comical. Okay, the bomb is set. Oh no, the Muto took the bomb again. How did they not see that coming when the same thing just happened last night? Ford is a bomb expert, so we needed a bomb for him to disarm in the climax. So this had to happen, but you don't want it to be this transparent. Godzilla meets the male Muto in battle, as L and other civilians rush underground for shelter. Ford and the others leap into the skies with their parachutes. There's this choral, almost religious-sounding music, and some incredible shots of them in these storm clouds, glimpsing the battle in progress. It looks amazing, and with the music you can feel importance and impending doom, like they're inserting themselves into a world meant for gods and monsters, not people. On the ground, they're caught in the battle between Godzilla and one of the Mutos. They get out of the blast zone to find the nuke and the Muto's many offspring preparing to hatch. There's no time to disarm the bomb, so they opt for Plan B. Get the nuke as far from the city as possible. While they carry it, the other Muto joins in the fight, and the two of them overwhelm Godzilla. The team carries the nuke. Ford follows until he realizes those eggs are going to be a problem, so he douses them in fuel and blows them up. That gets the attention of the Mutos. They leave Godzilla to find the burnt-out eggs of their offspring, and the female spots Ford. She approaches, but too late learns of her grave error. They left Godzilla. They gave him time to recover and unleash his atomic breath. The female Muto narrowly survives when her mate comes to the rescue, and then she takes off to follow the nuke. That leaves the male Muto alone in his fight with Godzilla. The lizard wins, but collapses under the weight of a falling skyscraper. At the boat, most of the crew is taken out by the female, leaving it all up to Ford. He gets on the boat with the nuke and pushes off from the dock. Then once again finds himself face to face with the Muto. She prepares to strike, until Godzilla bites her throat, holds open her jaws, and fills her with atomic breath. Her body falls, and Godzilla drops her decapitated head alongside it, as he roars victoriously before collapsing from exhaustion. Ford does the same, next to the armed nuclear warhead about 5 minutes from detonation. He closes his eyes, until a bright light shines above him. A rescue helicopter arrives and takes him to safety while the nuke detonates away from any civilians. When the sun rises, Ford reunites with his son and wife, and Godzilla wakes. He roars to the sky before returning to the sea, crowned by the public as savior of their city and king of the monsters. Many were disappointed by a somewhat anticlimactic battle because much of it is hidden from us, either because it's off-screen or shrouded in darkness and smoke. But we do see a decent amount, and it looks great. Not only from a CGI standpoint, but again, filtered through Gareth Edwards' found footage aesthetic. There are also some standout moments. Godzilla coming out of the smoke to continue his battle after Ford and the others land, Godzilla taking out the male Muto, and shortly after that, the reveal of his atomic breath. Sure, it might have been nice to see more, but what we got was pretty fantastic. At the same time, the forced involvement of humans in the battle feels like a distraction, especially when the movie tries to feel grounded, but their story is so cliched and a result of really dumb, self-imposed problems, basically handing a nuke to the Mutos, then having to get it back and out of the city. Speaking of cliches, it's a bit eye-roll inducing that in the span of a few minutes, they do the exact same thing twice. The female Muto is about to kill Ford, and Godzilla is nowhere to be found because he's been incapacitated. Except he quickly recovered off-screen and swoops into the rescue at the last moment. That exact same thing happens twice in the final battle. On top of that, all the characters from Ford to Ishiro continue to feel paper-thin and uninteresting, especially when they're overshadowed by the monster combat we're here for. By this point, they feel so unimportant that every time we cut to them, it momentarily takes you out of the movie. Because we don't care about these characters, moments that should be powerful fall flat. Like Godzilla rescuing Ford, then collapsing at the same time as his new human friend. Or the coda where everyone reunites. That should have been an emotional conclusion, the moment where our heroes get what they were after. But at that moment, all we care about is the big lizard taking his bow and returning to the sea. It looks like that's our final score. And with that, another movie has been entered into the ranking.